The most debated topic we are going to discuss today, which is God. I want to share some of the strongest argument I've heard both from atheists and believers. And in the end, I want to share my take on all of this and where do I stand. So let's get started. Before I start, I want to also add that it's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's more about learning and understanding different perspectives. Let's first start with the definition of atheism.
One thing that we have to understand before we can even begin this discussion is the concept of the burden of proof. Atheism is thought of by many as simply a lack of belief in God. And the point was raised that no, that can't be the case because a lack of belief in God entails some belief in the opposite. This isn't the case. Atheism is a claim to belief. It comes from the Greek, a meaning without, theos meaning God. It simply means living your life.
This is a very common statement that most atheists make. Atheism is not a belief. It's just lack of belief in God. But this is far from true. And I'm going to share a clip that will explain this better.
When I hear from an atheist, some of the top atheists that we debate, oh no, this is just an intellectual thing. Just an intellectual thing. I was a Christian when I was young. I saw the evidence, and I'm not a Christian anymore. Well, then we start to debate, and immediately out of the gate, they're so angry. Why are you angry, bro? Why are you angry, bro? I mean, this God you don't believe in, you're so angry at. You don't believe he exists. Who gets angry at something that you don't believe exists? So that proves the point that it's an emotional issue, usually connected to pride.
So I am a psychiatrist and I'm going to break it down even further. If atheism is not a belief, why do some atheists become so emotional and defensive about it? Strong emotions reveal attachment, and attachment usually comes from a belief. And whenever someone's pride is involved, it's no longer logic. It becomes personal. So this one is an atheist discussing different religions, and it does make a lot of sense.
The populace of Saudi Arabia is 95% Muslim and therefore 95% theistic, whereas the populace of Thailand is 95% Buddhist and therefore at best 5% theistic. How likely you are to be a theist, in other words, is intimately tied to the place in which you happen to be born. What can better explain this geographical spread? Theism or atheism? Well, let's consider our two competing hypotheses. Could it be that God does exist, but that the Thai are simply naturally 20 times more likely to be resistant to belief in God than, say, the Saudis? Are they just naturally 20 times more stubborn or something? This seems implausible. This doesn't seem to be their fault. Okay, so maybe then it's not their fault, and God just has some reason to hide his face disproportionately more from the Thai than from Saudis, or indeed from those born here in Massachusetts, which, according to one statistic, is 75% theistic. If theism is true, it seems to me that God has a lot to answer for here. Is it not troubling, as a Christian, that your place of birth is a reliable statistical indicator of how likely you are to be saved?
This is a solid argument, and I know where he is coming from. His argument is backed by logic and empirical evidence, and a lot of atheists feel very proud of following science and relying on evidence, what they can see, measure, and prove, and that is very fair. But we cannot prove everything we value scientifically, like we cannot prove or measure our emotions. They are so powerful, like love, hate, fear. We also cannot prove or measure purpose of life. We also cannot do the same with consciousness. So there are certain things that are very important, but we cannot scientifically prove or measure. And it does not mean that they don't exist. And while atheists think that they are really logical, but are they? Their whole theory actually kind of negate itself and point towards a higher being. And I'm going to share a clip of a comedian, but it is just so powerful and says it all. Are you ready for it?
But it doesn't matter. If you're an atheist or a theist, I actually think we're all kind of in the same boat. Really, I do. Some people think God created the universe. Some people think nothing. created the universe, which is the funniest guess. And the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, maybe. But you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That's the defining characteristic of nothing, is that it doesn't exist. So what are we talking about? Either you think it's God, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove, or you think it's nothing, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove. But I think we can all agree, if your nothing sometimes spontaneously erupts into everything, that's a pretty goddamn magical fucking nothing, you guys. And ask the nothing people, what happens when you die? They'll tell you, nothing. You go into nothing. I'm like, you mean you merge back with your creator? That's heaven, bitch.
That is a good clip shared by Candace.
If I were still an atheist, this one line of evidence would convince me that God exists. Virtually every scientist in the world now believes the universe began at some point in the past.
That the universe is not eternal.
It's not eternal. It has not always existed. Alexander Vilenkin, the head of the Cosmology Institute at Tufts University, said the proof is now in place that the universe had a beginning. Well, that makes a strong argument for God, because whatever begins to exist has a cause. We now know the universe began to exist. Therefore, there must be a cause behind the universe.
All those scientific theories, Big Bang and evolution, tells us how, but it doesn't tell us why. An atheist cannot answer the question why. Why all of this? Why are we here? What's the purpose? And that can get very depressing, thinking that this is it, once you die, everything will end. So it's just logically that doesn't make sense either. The argument that God exists, no one is able to prove it. Similarly, the argument that God doesn't exist, no one is able to prove it either. In the end, it all comes to the belief. What makes sense to you here? Science points towards religion, like complexity of the universe, the interconnectedness of all of us, also the laws of physics. But atheists will use the same data and say that it's all random and self-created. That's where it comes down to. Both sides will use the same data and same argument and will prove their own belief system. A lot of people don't understand this, that it's not about what we prove. It's about what we are willing to accept. Every belief has to make sense to you in your heart, personally first, and then it makes all the logical sense in your mind. That's how all religion works. That's also how atheism works. So when I became agnostic, I remained theistic. I always believed life after death, and I always believed that there is a higher power. Here's where I stand. I think there are believers and non-believers. Believers who believe in a higher power or God, and non-believers who reject that idea. But I don't think the world is made out of right or wrong, and I just don't waste my time thinking who will go to hell and who will go to heaven. Allah is the judge. It's not my job to decide or think about it. For me, faith enters your heart first, and then it makes sense to your mind. That's how it happened to me. So when I came back to Islam, how I came back, I was in a 10-day silent meditation retreat when I was completely disconnected from the outside world. There was no social media, there was no access to books, there was no access to anyone. And at that time, I felt Allah is calling me back to Islam. So it was just very, very powerful experience for me. And then I had a breathwork session where I literally got messages from Allah and Prophet Muhammad. So that's why I came back to Islam. It was something very personal to me, and it makes sense to me. But I just don't think that there are different types of gods. I think God is only one. We all are trying to reach God in our own way and in our own different tribes. At the end, I would say that whether you're a believer or non-believer, if we can accept our differences, and not only accept it, embrace it, and stay connected to each other, in a very humanly way, we are at least doing something right. I want to end this video with Jordan Peterson.
I think I can demolish the atheistic argument permanently. It requires a reconsideration of what we mean by belief. And I walked through some of it. It's like, do you believe in the good? The difference between believing in good and believing in God is, it's a very narrow difference. Now, there are important differences, but it's still a narrow difference. And the thing is, if you don't believe in good, you're aimless. And if you're aimless, you're hopeless. And if you're aimless and hopeless, you're anxious and fractionated. And people can't unite in their beliefs. Like the alternative is not good.
So as long as you are doing good, you are reaching God. Please share your comments in the comment section, and I will see you next time.